Story 1: The Haunted Shack and the Black Sun Dream. Dreams can be portals to our deepest fears. Or so they say. But what if those dreams were more than just figments of your imagination? What if they were windows to something else, something darker, ancient, and unknowable? For years, a single nightmare dominated my nights, replaying like a broken record that I couldn't escape. I'd wake screaming, drenched in sweat, often finding myself in places I couldn't remember going. My parents would scold me, my friends would laugh, and therapists would furrow their brows, scribbling notes that never led anywhere. It was just a dream, they said, a fragment of a child's overactive imagination. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel what I felt. And even as an adult, long after the screams had stopped, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't confined to my mind. It had left a mark, an invisible tether tying me to that desert under the full moon. I'm sharing this not because I've found closure, but because I hope someone out there has seen the same thing. Maybe together, we can unravel the truth. The dream always began the same way. I was standing barefoot in the middle of an endless desert. The sand beneath my feet was strangely cold, almost icy, and it crunched faintly as I shifted my weight. Above me, the moon hung impossibly large, its light so bright it cast razor-sharp shadows that danced unnaturally across the dunes. No wind, no sound, just a vast, oppressive silence that seemed to seep into my skin. At first, I would walk. There was no clear destination, but my legs carried me forward as if following a magnetic pull. The desert was barren, save for occasional clusters of black rocks, their jagged edges glinting under the moonlight. Every step felt heavier, the sand clinging to my feet like it wanted to hold me back. The further I walked, the more the landscape changed. The dunes became smaller, flatter, and the ground started to crack, as though the desert itself was fracturing. That's when I'd see it, the shack. The structure always seemed to appear out of nowhere. One moment, there was nothing but endless sand. The next, it stood there, casting long, crooked shadows. It was small, barely more than a hovel, with walls of crumbling concrete and a roof held up by weathered wooden beams. A single candle flickered in the window. The light was faint, but it cast enough illumination to reveal the sparse interior. A tiny table stood in the center, its surface scarred with deep gouges. Behind it was a chair, its backrest tilted at an odd angle as if someone had risen from it in a hurry. The first few times I saw the shack, I didn't approach. Something about it felt wrong, like an ancient wound that hadn't healed. But the dream always compelled me forward eventually, no matter how much I tried to resist. When I finally reached the door, I would knock. The sound was hollow, reverberating unnaturally, as if the shack was bigger on the inside than it appeared. I'd wait, holding my breath, but no one ever answered. That's when the sensation began. It was a prickling at the back of my neck, a crawling awareness that someone, or something, was watching me. I'd turn, my eyes drawn to the window. The candlelight would flicker erratically, its glow distorting like light refracted through water. And then I'd see it. A silhouette. Faint, translucent, and humanoid. It stood on the other side of the glass, watching me. It never moved, but its gaze, though featureless, seemed to pierce straight through me. It wasn't curiosity I felt emanating from it. It was something darker, something ancient and predatory. I always ran. The moment I turned away from the shack, the desert would shift. The ground beneath my feet became unstable, the sand turning to blackened glass that cracked with each step. Shadows began to stretch unnaturally long, reaching for me as though alive. And then came the whispers. Soft at first, like a distant breeze, but they grew louder, forming an unintelligible chant that filled the air. It was a language I couldn't understand, but its cadence was wrong, broken, disjointed, like a record skipping in reverse. The agave plants would appear then. They sprouted from the sand, their spiny leaves twisting and writhing as though in pain. They grew impossibly fast, towering over me, their blackened edges glistening under the moonlight. They swayed in unison, a grotesque dance that seemed to mock my fear. I'd run faster, my breath ragged, my heart pounding against my ribs. But no matter how far I went, the shack and its sinister occupant remained just behind me, their presence pressing against my back like a physical weight. Eventually, I'd reached the valley. The edge loomed before me, a sheer drop into darkness. But the valley wasn't empty. Far below, the agave plants writhed in endless waves, their movements more frenzied as though agitated by my arrival. And above it all, the black sun hung between the twin obelisks. I couldn't look away. Its surface wasn't smooth, it churned like liquid, flickering with a deep, blood-red glow. The obelisks framed it perfectly, their surfaces etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of the whispers in the air. The sun began to sink. A primal terror gripped me. I didn't know why, but I was certain that if the sun disappeared, something unspeakable would happen. My legs felt like lead, my body frozen in place as I watched its descent. The agave plants screamed, not whispers, not chants, but a high-pitched, guttural wail that vibrated through my bones. The ground shook violently, and I fell to my knees, my eyes locked on the black sun. Just as it slipped completely out of sight, the valley erupted in chaos. The plants lashed out wildly, their spines slicing through the air. The whispers transformed into deafening roars, and the obelisks began to crumble, their ancient stone disintegrating into ash. A force, unseen but immense, surged toward me. It was cold, impossibly cold, and it pulled at me with an intensity that felt like my very soul was being ripped apart. I always woke up in a panic, my body drenched in sweat, my heart racing. But the dream didn't let me go so easily. Its remnants clung to me, leaving me disoriented and drained. Worse, I'd often find myself in strange places, the kitchen, the front yard, even at the edge of the woods near my childhood home. As I grew older, the dream came less frequently, but its impact never faded. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. The desert, the shack, the black sun, it all felt too real, too vivid to be a mere figment of my imagination. What was the black sun? Why did the silhouette in the shack feel so malevolent? And why, after all these years, do I still feel like I'm being watched every time I look up at the night sky? If you've ever had a dream like this, something too vivid, too real, tell me. Share your story. Maybe together, we can uncover the truth lurking in the shadows of our subconscious. Or maybe, just maybe, we'll find that the truth is something far more terrifying than we ever imagined. Story 2, Near-Death Overdose and the Dark Space. Have you ever been so close to the edge of death that you felt the thin, fragile barrier between this world and whatever comes next? I have. In November of 2005, I made a reckless decision that nearly cost me my life. What I experienced wasn't just pain or fear, it was something else entirely. For one brief, horrifying moment, I felt the void. No light. No sound. No hope. Just an endless, suffocating darkness that swallowed me whole. And even though I made it back, a part of me has never truly left that place. This is my story. It's graphic, unsettling, and deeply personal. But if sharing it prevents even one person from making the same mistake I did, it's worth reliving. It started on a cold November evening. I was 19 years old, struggling to find my footing after losing my scholarship to a university I had dreamed of attending. The financial aid office had denied my application, and without any clear direction, I was floundering. I'd joined Job Corps, a government program aimed at giving people like me a chance at a career. But the monotony of the program left me restless and searching for an escape. That night, I was visiting my brother. Bored of the few video games I had brought along, I decided to experiment with something I'd heard about from friends, an over-the-counter hallucinogen. They'd spoken of wild, trippy experiences, a temporary escape from the mundane. What they didn't warn me about, or maybe I was too stubborn to listen, was how easily things could go wrong. I bought the wrong medication. I thought I was taking something relatively safe. Something that would give me a brief, mind-bending adventure. But the pills I swallowed contained other active ingredients, ones that, in large doses, could shut down vital organs. Within an hour, the effects began to take hold. My vision blurred, and I felt an overwhelming fatigue unlike anything I'd experienced before. My head buzzed with disjointed thoughts, each one slipping away before I could grasp it. My limbs grew heavy, as if invisible weights were pulling me toward the ground. Then came the nausea. I fell asleep. Or at least, I think I did. But when I woke up, everything had changed. I opened my eyes to a world that didn't feel real. The first thing I noticed was the dryness. My eyes were so parched that it hurt to blink. The second thing was the inability to move. My body felt disconnected, like a puppet with its strings cut. Panic set in as I tried to call out, but my voice was little more than a rasp. Crawling to the bathroom, I vomited violently, my stomach heaving until there was nothing left. The effort left me weak. But something inside me knew this wasn't just a bad reaction, I was in serious trouble. My brother found me moments later, pale and shaking on the bathroom floor. When I managed to whisper, "I think I need help," he didn't hesitate. Grabbing the empty pill packaging, he and his wife rushed me to the emergency room. The last thing I remember from that moment was a flurry of voices, the beeping of monitors, and the sharp sting of N4 being inserted into my arm. Then, the world went dark. When I say the world went dark, I don't mean I blacked out. I was still aware, more aware than I'd ever been. But it was awareness in a space that defied all logic. I found myself in what can only be described as a vast, infinite void. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling. Just pitch-black emptiness stretching in every direction. I couldn't see my hands or feet. Yet I could feel them. I was still me but stripped of my body, my surroundings, and my connection to the world. The silence was deafening. There were no echoes, no vibrations, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against me like a physical weight. Every step I took sent faint ripples through the space. But they faded as quickly as they appeared. "Hello?" I called out. My voice barely a whisper. It vanished into the darkness. Swallowed whole by the void. I started walking. It was the only thing I could do. My hands stretched out in front of me, searching for a wall, a door, anything that might anchor me. But there was nothing. No matter how far I went, the void stretched on, endless and unyielding. Time didn't exist there. Minutes, hours, days, it all blurred together into one long, uninterrupted stretch of nothingness. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. But I could feel it. Something was there, watching me. It struck without warning. One moment, I was walking, my footsteps echoing faintly in the void. The next, I was being yanked backward by a force so cold it burned. It wasn't a hand or a claw, it was like water, liquid and unrelenting, wrapping around me and pulling me down. I screamed, but no sound came out. My vision blurred as I spiraled downward, the void spinning around me like a whirlpool. Then, suddenly, I wasn't falling anymore. I was floating, suspended in the darkness. And then I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling my name. It was familiar, my brother's voice, sharp with panic. The sound grew louder, cutting through the void like a lifeline. "Stay with us," another voice commanded. The cold grip loosened, and I felt a jolt, electric, painful, and overwhelming. Light exploded around me, and the darkness shattered like glass. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body weak and trembling. Tubes were inserted into my nose, and monitors beeped steadily around me. A doctor entered the room, his face grave but relieved. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "Your heart stopped for a minute, but we were able to bring you back." 1 minute. That's how close I came to losing everything. The doctor explained that the overdose had caused severe damage to my body. They'd pumped my stomach, given me activated charcoal to absorb the toxins, and monitored me through the night. But it was the mention of my heart stopping that stayed with me. I had died. And in that brief moment, I'd experienced something I still can't fully explain. The void haunts me to this day. It wasn't just emptiness, it was an absence of everything. A liminal space between life and death that stripped away all sense of self. Was it a hallucination? A dying brain grasping at fragments of consciousness? Or was it something more? I don't have the answers. But I know one thing, I never want to go back there. If you've ever had a near-death experience, I want to hear your story. Did you see the void? Did you feel its presence? Or was your experience something entirely different? Share it with me, I think we're all searching for the same answers. And if you're tempted to experiment with substances, let my story be your warning. Nothing is worth the risk of losing yourself to the darkness. Story 3, a request to the spirit world. Do you believe in life after death? In signs from the other side? Some people call them coincidences, while others claim they're messages from beyond. For me, it was a playful experiment, something I never expected to work. But what started as a whimsical challenge turned into an experience I can't explain. One that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the thin veil between the two. It began with a simple request, "Auntie, if you can hear me, show me a fox." What happened next changed the way I see the world, and the afterlife, forever. This is my story. Growing up, my Aunt Maria was my favorite person in the world. She wasn't just an aunt, she was my confidant, my cheerleader, and, in many ways, my second mother. She had a wicked sense of humor and a knack for turning even the darkest moments into something bearable. "You know I'll never leave you," she'd say, ruffling my hair. "Not even when I'm gone. I'll stick around. Just to make sure you don't do anything too crazy." I'd roll my eyes and laugh. "Like haunt me?" "Exactly," she'd reply with a grin. "But don't worry, I'll only do it when you need me. And I'll make it fun." Her words felt like a joke at the time, but they stuck with me. Even after she passed away in 2015, I could still hear her voice, her laughter, echoing in my mind. But as the years went by, that laughter grew fainter. The sharp ache of her absence dulled, replaced by a lingering emptiness. I missed her terribly. But life moved on, as it always does. By 2024, the idea of Aunt Maria sticking around felt like a distant memory, a comforting thought I no longer truly believed. It was a crisp October afternoon when the idea first took root. I was unloading the dishwasher, half listening to a podcast about angels and spirit guides. The host, an energetic medium, was talking about how to connect with the afterlife. "All you have to do," she said, her voice warm and reassuring, "is ask. Be specific. Your guides, your loved ones, they're always listening. They want to help you. You just have to trust them enough to ask for a sign." Her confidence was infectious. And before I knew it, I was talking back to the podcast. "Sure. Right," I muttered. "Because it's that easy." Still, something about her words lingered. Could it really be that simple? Could I reach out to Aunt Maria, after all these years, and get an answer? I decided to try. But if I was going to test this theory, I needed to make it specific, something unmistakable. Something tied to her in a way I couldn't ignore. That's when I thought of the fox, standing in my kitchen. I spoke aloud, feeling a little foolish but also oddly hopeful. "Auntie, if you can hear me, I want to see a fox." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and skepticism. I knew foxes weren't common in my area, but they weren't impossible either. It was the perfect test, rare enough to be meaningful, but not so outlandish that it couldn't happen. I glanced out the kitchen window, scanning the backyard for any signs of life. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves a riot of autumn colors. For a brief second, I thought I saw something, a flash of orange darting beneath the bushes, but when I looked closer, it was just a pile of leaves. I laughed at myself. What did you expect? A fox to come trotting up to the window? Resigned, I turned back to the dishwasher and reached for the last stack of plates. That's when it happened. One of the plates caught my eye. It was small and brightly colored, with a whimsical design that immediately drew my attention. In the center of the plate was a fox, its tail curled elegantly around its body, its amber eyes gleaming with mischief. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Where had this plate come from? I didn't remember owning anything like it. I checked the rest of the dishes, but none of them matched. It was the only one. My hands trembled as I placed the plate on the counter, staring at it as if it might vanish. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had given it to me as a gift. And I'd forgotten. Maybe it had been hiding in the back of a cabinet for years. But no matter how many explanations I came up with, none of them felt right. This was her. As I stood there, the room seemed to shift. The air grew warmer. And I felt a strange, comforting presence wash over me. It was subtle at first, like the faint brush of a hand on my shoulder. Then, in the back of my mind, I heard it, Aunt Maria's laughter. It was soft, playful, and unmistakable. "You didn't think I could do it, did you?" her voice teased. "You didn't say it had to be a real fox." A laugh bubbled up from my chest, mingling with tears that I hadn't realized were falling. She had done it, she had found a way to reach me. To remind me that she was still here. Just as she'd promised. For the first time in years, I felt truly connected to her. That day marked a turning point in my life. I began to notice other signs, small, seemingly insignificant things that carried a weight I couldn't ignore. A song on the radio at just the right moment. A sudden memory triggered by the scent of her favorite perfume. Each time, I felt her presence. Her love. Her mischievous spirit. But the fox plate remains the most tangible proof of our connection. I keep it on a shelf in my kitchen, where I see it every day. It's a reminder that the bond we shared didn't end with her passing. That love transcends the boundaries of life and death. What about you? Have you ever experienced something like this? A sign from a loved one? A moment that made you question what's possible? If you're skeptical, I understand, I was too. But I encourage you to try. Speak to the people you've lost. Ask for something specific. And if you do, pay attention. The signs are there, waiting for you to notice. Life is full of mysteries. And maybe, just maybe, the answers are closer than we think. Story 4, The Convention Creature. Have you ever been somewhere crowded, surrounded by laughter and energy, only for the world to suddenly go silent? Imagine the buzz of conversation dying mid-sentence, replaced by an unbearable, suffocating stillness. Imagine turning a corner and locking eyes with something that should not exist. Something so grotesque and wrong it freezes you in place. That happened to me. Twice. It wasn't in some shadowy forest or a crumbling mansion, but at a lively convention center, packed with people. The kind of place where you're supposed to feel safe, surrounded by light and noise and life. And yet, in the midst of that bustling crowd, I came face to face with a creature so horrifying it shattered my sense of reality. I haven't been back to a convention since. I'm not sure I ever will. It was 2020. Just before the world changed. At a furry convention my husband and I had been planning for months. For those who don't know, furry conventions are vibrant, welcoming events where attendees celebrate creativity and community. It was my escape, a weekend to let go of life's stress and immerse myself in something fun. On the second day of the convention, I decided to explore alone for a while. My husband stayed behind in one of the panel rooms, engrossed in a discussion about costume design. I wandered the maze of booths and displays, taking in the colorful art and intricate costumes. That's when it happened. I turned down a narrow hallway leading to one of the smaller exhibit rooms. The air felt different here, stale, heavy, as if the ventilation system had failed. I hesitated, the faint sound of laughter and chatter from the main hall fading behind me. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The chatter. The footsteps. Even the faint hum of electricity, it all vanished. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest like a weighted blanket. And then I smelled it. A sickening combination of mold, rotting fish, and something dusty, like an ancient library long forgotten. The stench hit me like a physical blow, making my eyes water and my stomach churn. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. That's when I saw it. It was crouched in the far corner of the room, its spindly limbs folded unnaturally, its skin pale and almost translucent. It was tall, even hunched over. It towered over me, and its body seemed stretched, as if someone had taken a human shape and pulled it out like taffy. Its face, or what passed for one, was the worst part. Smooth, featureless skin stretched taut over its skull, with two deep, sunken sockets where eyes should have been. Its mouth was a gaping black hole, wide and toothless, emitting a faint, raspy breath that sent shivers down my spine. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body refused to obey me, as if the creature's gaze had rooted me in place. The stench grew stronger, almost unbearable, and I fought the urge to gag. Then it moved. It didn't walk or crawl, it glided, its limbs dragging behind it as though gravity worked differently for it. Slowly, it closed the distance between us, its eyeless sockets fixed on me. When it was only a few feet away, it stopped. I could feel its breath, cold and damp, brushing against my face. My vision blurred as tears streamed down my cheeks, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. The sounds of the convention returned in a rush, the distant chatter, the hum of electricity, the clatter of footsteps. The creature was gone. I stumbled back into the main hall, gasping for air, my legs barely holding me up. I spent the rest of the convention in a haze, clinging to my husband like a lifeline. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, how could I? It sounded insane, like something out of a cheap horror movie. Instead, I blamed my behavior on exhaustion and tried to put the experience behind me. But the memory lingered. At night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the smell of mold and fish still clinging to my nostrils. I started avoiding dark hallways and empty rooms, even in my own home. For months, I told myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by stress or lack of sleep. And then it happened again. It was 2022. At another convention. This time, I had convinced myself that the first incident was a one-time thing, a strange but ultimately explainable event. I wanted to reclaim the joy I once felt at these gatherings, to immerse myself in the community I loved. But the moment I stepped into the convention center, unease crept over me. The air felt heavy, just like before, and the faint smell of mildew lingered at the edges of my senses. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the cheerful faces around me, but the feeling wouldn't go away. On the second day, I found myself alone again, wandering through a quiet section of the venue. I turned a corner, and there it was. This time, the creature was different. Its skin was no longer pale but a deep, bruised red, and its eyeless sockets seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Its mouth was wider, stretching impossibly across its face, and from it came a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. The stench was overwhelming, and the air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. But the creature followed, its movements even more erratic than before. It didn't touch me, it didn't have to. Its presence alone was enough to paralyze me with fear. Finally, I broke into a run, stumbling through the halls until I found my husband. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing, and begged him to take me home. I haven't been to a convention since. Even now, years later, I can't explain what I saw. Was it a ghost? A demon? A figment of my imagination? All I know is that it was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. Sometimes, late at night, I catch a whiff of that same moldy, fishy smell, and my heart races. I check the corners of my room, the dark spaces under the bed, half expecting to see those eyeless sockets staring back at me. What was it? Why did it appear to me? Not once but twice? And is it still out there, waiting for another chance to show itself? If you've ever seen something like this, something that defies explanation, please share your story. I need to know I'm not alone. Story 5, The Autumnal Haunting. Every October, she comes back. I don't know who she is or why she chose me. All I know is that when the air turns crisp and the leaves start to fall, she returns. It begins as a feeling, subtle at first, like someone watching me from the shadows. Then come the whispers, faint and unintelligible, threading through the silence of my apartment. By mid-October, her presence is undeniable, a gaunt, spectral old woman with sunken eyes, standing in my doorway, smiling as if she knows something I don't. She gets closer every night. By Halloween, she's in my room, standing over my bed. And then, just as suddenly as she came, she disappears, leaving me drained, terrified, and wondering what she really wants. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because I don't know how much longer I can take it. Maybe someone out there has answers. Or maybe you've seen her, too. It was supposed to be a new beginning. I'd been searching for an affordable place to live for months when I stumbled upon the apartment. It was a steel, spacious, with beautiful hardwood floors, high ceilings, and large bay windows that filled the space with light. Sure, it was an older building, but that only added to its charm. The landlord seemed eager to rent it out, offering me a significant discount if I moved in by the end of the month. I didn't think twice. At the time, it felt like fate, a perfect place to start over after a rough couple of years. The first few months were uneventful. I spent my summer exploring the neighborhood, decorating the apartment, and settling into a routine. By the time autumn arrived, I felt like I was finally getting back on track. That all changed in late September. It started with small things, barely noticeable. The kind of occurrences you might dismiss without a second thought. One night, as I was reading in bed, the hallway light flickered. I got up to check the bulb, but it was fine. A few days later, I found my bedroom door slightly ajar when I was sure I had closed it. Then there was the feeling, an inexplicable sensation of being watched. It crept over me when I was alone in the apartment, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The first time I heard the whispers, I was in the kitchen. It was late at night, and I was putting away dishes when I heard it, a faint, raspy murmur coming from the living room. I froze, straining to hear. The sound was so soft it was almost imperceptible. But it was there, threading through the silence like a dark undercurrent. I turned off the lights and went to bed, telling myself it was the wind or the building settling. But that night, I dreamed of shadows moving through my apartment, whispering my name. The first time I saw her, it was in the bathroom mirror. It was early October, and I was brushing my teeth before bed. As I leaned over the sink, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement behind me. I froze, my heart pounding, and slowly looked up at the mirror. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then I saw her. She was standing in the hallway, just beyond the bathroom door. She was old, ancient, even with deep wrinkles etched into her pallid skin. Her hair was a wild tangle of gray, and her eyes were hollow, sunken pits that seemed to pull the light out of the room. She wore a long, black dress that looked like it belonged in another century, tattered and clinging to her skeletal frame. But it was her smile that froze me in place. It was too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. I spun around, expecting to find her there. But the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night. After that, things escalated. She started appearing more frequently, always at night. At first, she stayed in the shadows, lurking in doorways, standing at the end of the hallway, or peeking around corners. But as the days passed, she began to get closer. One night, I woke up to find her standing at the foot of my bed. Her skeletal hands rested on the mattress, and her hollow eyes were fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was lie there, paralyzed by fear. As she smiled that grotesque, predatory smile, my health began to deteriorate. I felt constantly drained, as though her presence was siphoning the life out of me. My appetite vanished, and I started waking up with bruises on my arms and legs, as if something had been gripping me in my sleep. By mid-October, I was a wreck. I tried everything to get rid of her: prayers, cleansing rituals, even calling a priest to bless the apartment. Nothing worked. The final night of October was the worst. I had been dreading Halloween all month, knowing it marked the peak of her torment. That evening, I barricaded myself in my bedroom, turning on every light and playing music to drown out the whispers. It didn't help. At midnight, the lights began to flicker. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. And then she was there, standing in the doorway. This time, she didn't wait. She glided toward me, her movements unnatural and jerky, like a puppet on strings. I scrambled back against the headboard, but there was nowhere to go. She climbed onto the bed, her bony frame pressing down on me. Her icy hands gripped my wrists, pinning me in place. And she leaned down until her face was inches from mine. Her breath was rancid, a sickening mix of decay and rot. And her sunken eyes seemed to bore into my soul. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. All I could do was stare into the void of her gaze as her smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I don't remember how it ended. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was lying on the floor, gasping for air. I moved out the following week, leaving most of my belongings behind. But even now, months later, I can't escape her. Every autumn, when the air turns crisp and the leaves start to fall, I feel her presence again. It's subtle at first, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. A faint whisper in an empty room. But as October progresses, the signs become more obvious. I've tried moving. Tried cleansing rituals. Tried everything I can think of to escape her. But nothing works. She always finds me. What does she want? Why does she haunt me? Year after year? And most terrifying of all, what will happen if she decides not to leave? Have you ever experienced something like this? A presence that refuses to let you go. No matter where you run? Do you think there's a way to escape her? Or am I doomed to endure this torment every autumn? If you've faced something similar, please share your story. Maybe together we can find some answers, or at least some comfort in knowing we're not alone. Story 6: The Theme Park Ride. Theme parks are supposed to be fun, right? The laughter, the vibrant colors, the smell of cotton candy and popcorn, it's all designed to make you feel safe. Even when you're hurtling through the air on a roller coaster. I never liked rides. The idea of being strapped into a speeding contraption with no control over my own safety always made my stomach churn. But that day, my friends convinced me. They said it was harmless, a gentle, old-timey minecart ride. They lied. By the time the ride ended, I was a trembling, furious wreck. Lucky to be alive. This is the story of how a day at the theme park turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and why I'll never set foot on a ride again. It was a perfect summer day. The kind that made the theme park feel like a great idea. My friends and I had planned the trip for weeks, a chance to escape our daily routines and let loose. The park was packed with families, couples, and groups of teenagers filling the air with laughter and excited chatter. I was fine with the games, the food, and even the water rides. But when it came to roller coasters and thrill rides, I always opted out. Heights made me queasy, and the thought of being flung around at high speeds was enough to make my palms sweat. "Come on, Sarah," Chris said, slinging an arm around my shoulders as we approached the ride. "You've been holding our bags all day. Just this one ride. It's not even scary." "Yeah. It's like a museum on wheels," added Lily, grinning. I eyed the ride warily. The track was old and wooden, winding through a faux mining town complete with animatronic miners and dusty lanterns. It didn't have the towering drops or looping tracks of a traditional roller coaster. But something about it still made my stomach twist. "Fine," I said. More to stop their teasing than because I wanted to. "Just this one." The line moved quickly. And before I knew it, we were climbing into one of the rickety minecarts. The seats were cramped, the paint peeling from the metal edges. But Chris and Lily seemed unfazed. I reached for the seatbelt, my fingers brushing against the worn fabric strap. It felt flimsy, but I pulled it across my lap and tried to buckle it. The latch wouldn't click. "Hey!" I called out to the ride operator, a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "My seatbelt isn't working." He glanced up from his phone, gave the belt a half-hearted tug, and shrugged. "It's fine. Just hold on tight." "What?" I started. But before I could protest, he hit the start button. The cart jolted forward, and my heart leapt into my throat. At first, it wasn't so bad. The cart creaked along the track at a leisurely pace, weaving through a series of animatronic displays. The miners swung their pickaxes in repetitive motions, their tinny voices droning on about striking gold. "See?" Chris said, nudging me. "Nothing to worry about." I forced a smile, gripping the edges of the seat with white-knuckled hands. But as we climbed higher, the track grew steeper, and the cart's speed increased. The animatronics disappeared, replaced by dark tunnels and narrow bridges. My stomach churned as the cart jerked around a sharp corner, throwing me against the side. Without the seatbelt, I slid dangerously close to the edge of the seat. "Chris," I said, my voice trembling. "The belt." "I've got you," he said quickly, grabbing my arm. But his grip couldn't stop the rising panic in my chest. The cart plunged into a tunnel, the air inside damp and cold. The walls were rough, uneven rock, and the only light came from flickering lanterns mounted on the walls. The cart tilted sharply to one side, and I felt myself sliding again. "Hold on," Chris shouted, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. I clawed at the edges of the cart, my fingers aching as I tried to keep myself steady. The ride was much faster than it looked from the outside, the cart rattling violently on the tracks. We burst out of the tunnel onto a narrow bridge suspended high above the ground. I made the mistake of looking down and immediately regretted it. The drop below was dizzying, the ground littered with jagged rocks. The cart swayed as it rounded another corner, the wheels screeching against the rails. My heart pounded, each bump and jolt making me feel like I was one step closer to being thrown out entirely. The track climbed higher, the incline so steep I could feel the cart struggling to pull itself upward. The anticipation was suffocating, each click of the wheels on the track sending a fresh wave of anxiety through me. When we reached the peak, there was a brief moment of silence. Then the cart tipped forward, and we plummeted. The wind tore at my face as we hurtled downward, the cart vibrating so violently I thought it might fly off the rails. I clung to the seat, my knuckles white, as Chris wrapped an arm around me to keep me from sliding out. "Almost there," he yelled over the roar of the wind. But the ride wasn't done with us yet. The track twisted sharply, throwing me to the side once again. My ribs slammed against the edge of the seat, pain blossoming in my side. Ahead, the track disappeared into another tunnel, the entrance framed by jagged, uneven rocks. The cart barreled forward, the darkness swallowing us whole. Inside the tunnel, the noise was deafening. The echo of the wheels against the rails filled the space, amplified tenfold by the narrow walls. The cart jolted and swayed, and I lost my grip on the seat. For a heart-stopping moment, I felt myself sliding out of the cart entirely. "Chris!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic. He lunged for me, grabbing my arm and pulling me back just as the cart emerged from the tunnel. The track leveled out, and the cart began to slow, the vibrations subsiding as we approached the unloading station. My whole body trembled, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I stumbled out of the cart, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. Chris helped me to the exit, his face pale and tight with anger. The ride operator was leaning against the control panel, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. "Hey!" Chris shouted, his voice echoing through the small station. "Do you have any idea what just happened? Her seatbelt didn't work. She could have died." The operator glanced up lazily, raising an eyebrow. "It's a slow ride," he said with a shrug. "She's fine." "Fine?" I snapped, my fear boiling over into fury. "I almost flew out of the cart. I told you the belt didn't work." And you ignored me. He shrugged again. These things happen. Chris lunged toward him. But I grabbed his arm, holding him back. A supervisor arrived moments later, alerted by the commotion. And I recounted the entire experience, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and residual fear. The supervisor apologized profusely, promising to investigate the malfunction and discipline the operator. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. That night, I lay awake, replaying the ride over and over in my mind. The feeling of sliding toward the edge, the weightless terror of nearly falling, it was all too vivid. I've never stepped onto a ride since. These days, I'm the designated bag holder, cheering my friends on from a safe distance. I used to feel embarrassed about it, but now I wear it like a badge of honor. Because no thrill, no matter how exciting, is worth the fear I felt that day. Have you ever had an experience like this? A moment where fun turned into terror? Share your story, I'd love to hear it. And if you ever feel unsafe on a ride, speak up. Don't let anyone dismiss your concerns. It could save your life. Story 7, The Mysterious Pre-Birth Memory. Have you ever felt like you've lived a moment before? Not déjà vu, but something more profound, like a memory from a time you couldn't possibly have experienced. What if that moment wasn't from your life but something from before your life began? I know how absurd that sounds. For years, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was a dream, a trick of my imagination. But the memory is too vivid, too persistent to ignore. I can recall it with a clarity that defies the passing of time, the infinite darkness, the glowing tunnels, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and unknowable. And the choice. Whatever happened in that void shaped the person I've become, and the life I now live. But it also left me with questions I can't escape. What was I choosing? And who, or what, was guiding me? If you've ever had a memory you can't explain, a feeling that defies logic, I want to hear your story. But first, let me tell you mine. The memory has always been there, lurking in the back of my mind like an old, familiar song. It's not tied to any point in my life, no place, no people, no tangible connection to the world I know. And yet, it feels more real than anything I've ever experienced. It begins in absolute darkness. Not the kind of darkness you find in a room with the lights off, but a vast, endless void that stretches infinitely in every direction. It's cold and silent. The kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against you like a heavy weight. I wasn't afraid. In that void, fear didn't exist. In the distance, there were tunnels, glowing softly, their light pulsing in gentle, rhythmic waves. Each tunnel was unique, its color and intensity hinting at the life it contained. Above each one floated shimmering golden words, glowing faintly in the dark. I could read them, though I didn't need to. The meaning entered my mind effortlessly, as if the words were already a part of me. They described lives, paths I could take, traits I could embody. Some were vibrant and warm, promising joy and adventure. Others were dim and cold, heavy with struggle and hardship. I knew, instinctively, that I was meant to choose. The choice wasn't simple. Each tunnel offered something different. And the more I studied them, the heavier the weight of the decision became. One tunnel glowed a soft blue, promising a life of intellectual pursuits and quiet introspection. Another shimmered with gold, its words speaking of fame, creativity, and boundless opportunity. But there were darker tunnels. 2 dimly lit passages with flickering, unstable light. They whispered of challenges, pain, and loss, but also of resilience and growth. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the glowing paths before me. I understood, even then, that the choice wasn't just about the life I wanted. It was about the person I would become. Some tunnels felt inviting, pulling me toward them with a warmth that promised safety and ease. But others repelled me, their cold light warning of struggle and sacrifice. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. What if I chose wrong? Was there even a right choice? As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, I felt it for the first time. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a faint pressure that seemed to wrap around me like a cold wind. Then it grew stronger, heavier, until I could no longer ignore it. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, watching me from the darkness. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comforting either. Its presence was immense, ancient, and impossible to fully comprehend. I tried to speak, but the void swallowed my words. Instead, my thoughts echoed outward, rippling through the darkness like waves in a still pond. What am I choosing? I thought, the question trembling in my mind. There was no reply, no voice to guide me, but the tunnels pulsed in response, their light growing brighter as if urging me to act. The presence didn't move closer, but its weight pressed down on me, making the decision feel even more urgent. I don't know how long I stood there, torn between the paths before me. Time didn't exist in that place, only the infinite expanse of the void and the glow of the tunnels. Finally, I stepped forward. The tunnel I chose wasn't the brightest or the warmest. Its light was steady but soft, its glow neither inviting nor repelling. The words above it spoke of balance, a life filled with both joy and sorrow, success and failure. It wasn't the easiest path, but it felt right. As I entered the tunnel, its light enveloped me, filling me with a strange mixture of hope and fear. The presence receded into the distance, its weight lifting as the void dissolved around me. And then, everything went black. I don't remember what happened next. The memory ends abruptly, like a movie cut off mid-scene. When I try to recall it, there's a gap, a blank space that feels like it should be filled with something important, something I've forgotten. What I do remember is waking up in my crib as a baby, my tiny body too small to contain the enormity of what I had just experienced. I couldn't speak, couldn't move the way I wanted to. But the memory lingered, vivid and undeniable. As I grew older, I began to question it. Was it real? A fragment of some metaphysical truth? Or was it just a dream? A creation of my developing brain? I tried to forget about it, but the memory never faded. In my teenage years, the dreams began. They weren't nightmares, not exactly, but they left me shaken. I'd find myself back in the void, standing before the tunnels. But this time, they weren't empty. Figures moved within them, shadows of what could have been. They were faint at first, indistinct shapes that flickered in and out of view. But as the dreams grew more frequent, the shadows became clearer. They were versions of me. Each one was different, shaped by the path I hadn't chosen. Some were confident and radiant, their eyes filled with a light I couldn't describe. Others were broken, their faces etched with sorrow and pain. They stared at me with hollow eyes. Their expressions filled with longing, resentment, and something I couldn't quite name. What did I leave behind? I whispered into the darkness, my voice trembling. What could I have been? The dreams come less frequently now. But when they do, they leave me with the same questions. What was the void? Was it real? Or just a fragment of my imagination? And the choice, was it truly mine? Or was I guided by something I can't understand? Sometimes, I feel the weight of the paths I didn't take. Moments of déjà vu hit me like a wave. And I wonder if they're glimpses of those other lives, faint echoes of the tunnels I left behind. I don't have the answers. And maybe I never will. But I can't shake the feeling that the memory means something. That it's a piece of a puzzle I'm still trying to solve. Have you ever experienced something like this? A memory you can't explain. A feeling that defies logic? If you have, I want to hear your story. Maybe together, we can make sense of it, or at least find comfort in knowing we're not alone. As the last story fades into the realm of imagination, or perhaps reality, you might find yourself asking the same questions that countless others have pondered. What truly lurks in the shadows of our world? Are the things we cannot explain mere tricks of the mind? Or are they glimpses into something far more profound? Here at Wolf Tells, we don't just share stories, we invite you to journey into the unknown. To explore the uncharted corners of fear, wonder, and mystery. The stories you've heard tonight aren't just entertainment, they're an invitation to question what you think you know about the world around you. What if there's more? What if the things we dismiss as coincidence or imagination are actually whispers of a deeper truth? In our next video, we'll dive into tales that push those boundaries even further. Ghostly apparitions, time loops, and encounters with the inexplicable, all waiting for you on the horizon. Make sure you don't miss it. Because the best way to confront the unknown is together. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, we'd love for you to become part of our growing community. Click that like button to let us know which tale gave you chills. Share this video with friends and family who love a good scare. And hit subscribe to join our pack at Wolf Tells. Your stories, your thoughts, your fears, they matter to us. Drop a comment below about your own experiences with the supernatural or which story left you questioning reality. And remember, every click, every share, every subscription helps us bring more tales of the unknown to life. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and most of all, sleep well, if you can. From all of us at Wolf Tells, we'll see you in the shadows.